Welcome to the BloombergQuint virtual roundtable on diversity and inclusion, which is powered by Accenture. Moving beyond gender diversity and keeping in mind the new challenges the pandemic has brought us, this virtual panel is about how Indian companies can deliver true diversity and inclusion for all Indians who seek opportunities and are qualified for roles, from underrepresented groups such as people with disabilities, LGBTQ, and of course, women who are still very underrepresented in the workforce in India. To help us discuss this today, we have an eminent set of panelists with us. First up, we have Lakshmi C, who heads Human Resources at Accenture India. With over 23 years of experience under her belt, Lakshmi is responsible for Accenture's talent strategy and HR service delivery and operations across all businesses in India, and she manages over 200,000 employees. Next up, we have Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, who has not only been a CEO of leading Indian IT services companies over the last 25 years, but also feels deeply about the subject and has done some great work in the field of diversity and inclusion. He is currently executive chairman and founder of 5F World, a platform for skills, startups, and social ventures in India. He is also the chairman of Honeywell Automation of India and is on the board of directors of the State Bank of India and Hinduja Global Solution. And this is one thing I really want to highlight about him. He is also the chairman of Lighthouse Communities Foundation, which is an ambitious mission to build communities through employment and entrepreneurship for all. So that is the part where I say that he's actually very involved in diversity and inclusion. And finally, we have Anuradha Razdan, who is a member of the Management Committee of Hindustan Unilever Limited as Executive Director, Human Resources, HR, and Vice President, HR, Unilever, South Asia. Ms. Razdan is a business-focused HR leader who has had an international career with rich experiences in Hindustan Unilever and global leadership roles. She is a board member of NHRD in India and a member of the CII National Committee for HR and Leadership. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I really look forward to a great discussion on this, what I think is a very, very important topic. And even as I begin, from my first question to you all, and perhaps Lakshmi, you can start with this, from the context of the roles that you play in different kind of organizations where you all are CXOs or have been CXOs, and your unique experiences, where do you see the diversity and inclusion agenda in India today? And with particular emphasis, of course, on your organizations.
Thank you for having me here. Looking forward to a great conversation today myself. In my view, it's fairly well established that diversity is crucial to driving innovation, and progressive organizations recognize that plurality of perspectives is essential to solve today's complex problems. A linear approach to problem solving or looking at a problem through a singular lens just cannot move our needle. But having a diverse workforce is just not enough. I believe we need a culture of equality to truly unlock the potential of a diverse workforce. A culture of equality is a culture where people can flourish irrespective of what their gender, their race, their color, their preferences, their identity, and where they have equal opportunities to not just learn, but to grow and succeed in their careers. In fact, our research, if I was to refer to Accenture's research around getting to equal, it has established that a culture of equality is critical for fueling innovation and growth for businesses and economies. And if I can share a few findings from that research that clearly establishes this. One, organizations that have the most equal cultures also benefit from an innovation mindset that is 6 times higher than organizations with least equal ones. 6 times. People in the most equal cultures see fewer barriers to innovation and therefore are less afraid to fail. And that's critical for us to engender a culture of innovation. And a third, when people feel a sense of belonging, they feel assured of equal opportunities at every stage, and they feel truly valued by their employers for their unique contributions and therefore empowered to innovate more. So I think, in my view, and this has been our focus within Accenture, to kind of create a culture of equality and getting to equal has been our particular emphasis, because we truly believe that that then leads to greater innovation, and that's critical for organizations to survive and thrive in this environment.
Dr. Ganesh, what about you? Where do you see the diversity and inclusion agenda in India today?
Actually, as Lakshmi rightly said, and I like the research that she mentioned, see, it is pretty active. And of course, equality amongst genders, equality amongst people of all types and all backgrounds is extremely important to kind of fuel innovation, which she rightly said. But what I find, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, is it's very different in India across industry sectors. I mean, the sector where I spend most of my time, which is first skills and then, of course, the software exports, I think it's a given. Because I remember when I joined Zensar and took over as CEO in 2001, we probably had out of 12 people in top management, we had just one woman who was the company secretary. But when I left in 2016, out of 23 people in top management, we had 13 women. And there was a real realization that women have no glass ceiling, they can go to the top. And of course, diversity for me goes way beyond that. In fact, today I'm on the boards of two international companies. One is Asian Venture Philanthropy Network in Singapore and Social Venture Partners in Seattle. And in both these, diversity and inclusion are top of our agenda. But to come back to your India question, I think for a very, very long time, we have almost not only men, but also women have felt that, look, maybe it's a man's world. And that's completely changing, which I'm delighted. But we still have a way to go. I mean, inclusion also means, getting all communities to feel wanted and protected, which is obviously a challenge sometimes, given the rhetoric that comes out on television and so much other places. So are we there yet? Absolutely not. Do we have a realization amongst top management, amongst economic leaders and political leaders that with diversity and inclusion is a big agenda? I think that's something that we are getting there.
Okay. So, Anuradha, from the context of this pandemic that we've all gone through and how the workplace has really changed, I want to really ask you, and also the role that you play in this organization, which is so very unique compared to our other two panelists, because Hindustan Unilever is not just services, but it's manufacturing, it's sales, it's distribution, it's R&D, and all of that, right? Where do you see the diversity and inclusion agenda in India today?
Thanks, Ivor. Look, I think building on what my esteemed panelists have said, the one thing that is clear is that the pandemic has not affected all segments of employees the same. Each of us has experienced a different reality. And it is true that those who are more vulnerable, women, are amongst those who've been disproportionately hit. And I think the one responsibility that we are all charged with as a generation of leaders is to make sure that we don't let this pandemic undo the progress that we have made on the agenda of gender balance over the last decade in our country and in the Indian corporate industry. Like I said, COVID-19 has taken an economic toll on women and has worsened the gender gap. India ranks now 112th out of 153. While on one hand, you've had women who are the frontline healthcare workers who've really gone above and beyond to provide people care, medical services during the pandemic. There are industries where women, like retail, hospitality, tourism, where women formed a bigger part of the workforce that have been amongst the first to be affected. And we saw this through the whole of last year. Also, there are more women in temporary jobs, and those are the jobs that were the first ones that companies let go of. And therefore, and of course, I don't need to articulate that with the toll of people all being at home, women having to balance household chores and work, and now this coming into the second wave. So it's really, really going to have a disproportionate and negative effect. And therefore, to make sure that we don't lose women and valuable female talent from the workforce, we need to do something which will support them, nurture them through this time. So what are some of the things that we are thinking of? One is what we call flexibility unlimited. And since the pandemic, now we know that 100% remote working is possible. And therefore, I hope that this is something that can become a way of life, and where it was a deterrent in the past, for example, at points of vulnerability, like return post maternity, where the women's often self-selected out because they thought they couldn't bear to leave their babies at home. We now have a place and a way in which they can continue, come back to their jobs while giving care to their children. There is support from government bodies and educational institutions. And this will help us build talent pools at the grassroots level. We have to work with our communities to educate them so that they are willing to send their women folk out. Also, I think access to female diverse talent pool in tier 2, tier 3 cities, or even outside the country is now possible. So in many ways, it's opened up many, many more opportunities. And as an organization that's looking for the best talent, we have to and we can now fish in multiple ponds. I think the other thing is to really espouse the cause of what I call gender balanced households. And while the given norm was that women will bear more of the workload, I think equally through the pandemic, we've seen a lot of male employees who sometimes for the first time have taken on sharing the house load. And we want to create policies and support infrastructures where it may be the father who's taking parental leave, or really, we support the family through whatever choices they make. Just to give you an example, we used to have a flexi work policy, which we have now called how we work, because flexi is taken as the way we work, and so we redefined it as the how we work policy. So there are a number of changes. I think it is not just enough to create policy changes. I think it's important to step into the shoes of individual employees, understand what they are going through, and customize and co-create solutions, because each person has really experienced this pandemic in a very, very different way. And therefore, the mental well-being, physical well-being, making sure that they are fully supported and feel able to come back to the workplace is something that's top of mind for us.
Why is it important to take diversity and inclusion, the conversation beyond gender? And why is it important? Because I think for a long time, whenever we spoke about diversity and inclusion, we just spoke about gender. Why the need to expand the conversation?
The logical answer comes from my own background. I mean, I remember in AppTech, which I was running for 10 years, when we first opened our first training center in Princeton, New Jersey in the US. And obviously, I mean, when you're having a training center in America, you need to employ local Americans. And it was actually my first experience of hiring a very interesting Jewish American. And the experience was not so much in hiring Joe, and I remember his name, but a year later we found he just wasn't cutting it. And in India, we have this thing about, oh my God, we've hired this American, and how do we take care of his ego and everything else? And I remember flying to Princeton just to kind of have this conversation with Joe. And that was my first lesson in diversity. Well, we're all so used to saying, oh my God, you shouldn't ask a person to leave and give him 3 months notice period and so on and so forth. And I remember sitting across the table with Joe and having this stupid conversation. And Joe looked at me and smiled and said, Ganesh, if you're telling me that you're letting me go, just say so, man. Don't ask me for 3 months notice period and all this stuff. Because in America, you tell somebody at 2 o'clock, and then 4 o'clock, you march him to his table, he clears out his possessions and he takes it home. This is a very simple process. So kind of, it's important for Indian leaders, Indian people to, they're all moving towards globalization. No Indian company, you look at an Accenture, look at a Unilever, they're all working in the as global citizens of the world. And we need to understand how to make everybody feel included. I think that's extremely important for building any successful organization, whether it's in India or it's global.
If I was to if I look at the world we're living in, right, it's highly complex today. The kind of problems we're trying to solve, we've never solved before. And we need the diversity of our perspectives to be able to solve the new challenges that are emerging. And if we're going to solve some of the biggest problems that are facing mankind, we need literally all hands on deck, and every perspective really matters. as an example, right? Today, around 15% of the world's population, at least estimated 15% of the world's population, which is around what, 1 billion people, live with some form of disability. And that's a large cross-section of people. And we are not bringing their perspectives as we design solutions and as we respond to the problems. Our solution and our response is going to be incomplete. So unless we bring in diverse perspectives, which is, I think, at the core of what Dr. Ganesh is also saying, which is recognize that there is a plurality of perspective, recognize and listen and respond by bringing in different perspectives.
As an FMCG company, as a global FMCG company, we would really like our organization to represent the consumer base that we serve. Women and gender is just the first bastion, because we see women, or have traditionally seen women, as primary users of our products. We have moved the needle on gender balance from 18% to 42% in the last decade. And it's more than time now to shift the focus to make sure that all forms of diversity, because the same ones that are represented in our consumer base, whether it is people with different ability, whether it's people with different orientations, and the reason we need to have these different different consumer groups represented in our employee base is because it allows us to step into the shoes of those consumers and to better craft products, mixes, communication that serve a different diaspora.
Ganesh, I wanted to ask you, you've looked at this for such a long time, right? But what is really the business case for diversity and inclusion? Lakshmi had some very interesting figures that she shared, which really put it from Accenture's perspective and from the research that they've done. And also, perhaps, does it have a role to play even in things like revenue growth itself, which are very tangible outcomes?
And I'm glad you brought it. I mean, I don't think anybody should look at diversity from a lens of pity or being doing good for mankind, etc. They don't need it. I mean, I think I mentioned the physically and the PWD, people with disabilities. And these are some of the proudest people on the planet. You mentioned the work we're doing in lighthouse communities, and we work with marginalized communities. We work with slum dwellers. And I mean, just as a little aside, I mean, one of the reasons why the whole skills movement in India has been such a disaster is because we believe that we as the rich people should set up skill centers and educate the poor. Did anybody ask the poor that, do you need help from us? On the contrary, we're finding that you get a slum child to walk into one of our lighthouses, they have as much aspiration, they have as much a view of the world as anybody else. And unless you understand that, everybody comes from a different planet or a different point of view, but ultimately we're all citizens of the world, we want to build something together. That's extremely important. So to take your point, there's a real revenue case for saying, let's build people of different nationalities, different ethnicities, different communities, different capabilities into the workforce. And once you start embracing that, you'll truly build a multicultural, multidimensional organization, and you'll see the benefit. I mean, I've seen it myself in my companies. We're seeing it today with all our clients, and I'm sure that's going to happen.
Let me add to that, right? Just some stats. More women in the workplace can actually lead to not just drive social growth, but also economic growth. In fact, according to Niti Aayog, pushing women's participation from the current 20% that we have in India to a 48%, which is the global average, over the next 10 years, we can actually add about $700 billion to our GDP growth. Which is just let that figure sink in for a moment, right? In fact, our research tells us that when women are provided equal opportunities and investments to advance and grow, everybody benefits. In organizations that have more women in leadership positions, men are more likely to grow by 23% across the ranks. And their chances of advancing to the highest levels of leadership almost double. So this is not just like Dr. Ganesh mentioned, a nice to do or a good to do. It makes very strong business, economic, social impact.
So I completely agree with you, Lakshmi. I mean, it just makes the whole organization more dynamic, more high performance oriented. And as I said, today for me, it's not just women, but people coming from other communities, people coming from different capabilities. I think we should really embrace this as we go forward.
A company like Hindustan Unilever, again, so many different kind of roles, people on the shop floor, people on the going to retailers, people in R&D labs. So what's the business case that you all see for diversity inclusion, and not just in India but across the world where you all operate?
So, like I said, the business case is very, very sharply defined by the fact that a consumer base should be well represented by the employee base. And while on one hand, it is a very, very complex operation and by no means easy to do, I think taking a very micro approach to saying who are the people whom we want to bring in, what are the talent pools, what are their realities, and therefore how can we attract the best of that talent and make sure that we grow them, develop them. And therefore, it's a very, very segmented, de averaged approach to diversity. Different groups, for example, if we want to bring in people of different ability and we want to bring in people who are differently abled in our front line or feet on street, then we partnered with NGOs to have career fairs, and we have an experiment where the walls vendors, we have differently abled people who are running the walls ice cream carts. Or on the other hand, if we want to experiment with bringing more women into the shop floor, and we've made a commitment that in the next 4 years, we will have 2,000 women in our shop floors. It means actually going to the grassroots, working with the communities. In Haridwar, we have a color cosmetics plant, which is 100% women, which is a 100% women plant. But that didn't just happen. We had to go and work with the communities who live around Haridwar, encourage them to educate their girl folk, to make sure that they feel confident to send them. So it's really, really, taking a very de-averaged approach and crafting solutions and strategies that allow us to cater to the different complexities of the business.
I think you all have laid out an excellent case, for the excellent business case for diversity and inclusion. But that brings me to the next point, how do we really enable all of this? So I want to ask you, Lakshmi, how do we really build this as a culture, right? A culture of equality to unlock human potential, unleash innovation, and create that environment of equal opportunity. And in practical terms, what does this look in terms of welcoming people with disabilities, autism, minorities, etc., etc.? So what's your take on that?
I think there are three important elements to building this culture. The first is around setting bold goals, and this kind of reflects, therefore, commitment from the very top leadership, and it is about treating inclusion and diversity like any other business goal. So that's about setting bold goals and leading from the top. The second is around the environment and creating an empowering environment. That requires, policies, it requires structural support, etc. Third, so in addition to bold goals at the top, empowering environment, the third is to have comprehensive action. You have to follow it through with comprehensive action, whether it be establishing the right processes, whether it be effecting the right inclusive policies, or having the right technology to enable high quality, consistent experiences for people. So for example, if I talk about specifically about gender diversity, at Accenture, we made an early and very visible global commitment and said that we will achieve a gender balanced workforce by 2025. We are about 500,000 people. And we said we will be 50-50 men, women by 2025. And it is a commitment that has the backing of our senior most leaders, of our CEO, of our board. And this is something we track and we report both internally as well as externally to the community. We are delivering on this commitment because we also have a very comprehensive approach that goes beyond just hiring to creating that environment I spoke about, where people feel empowered to bring their best selves to work, as well as balance what's expected of them personally and professionally. And we track this, and we track this just like any other business goal. And we measure, we adjust our execution deliberately and continuously. Today, 45% of our global workforce, women. Our CEO, woman. 42% of our board of directors, women. If I look at my senior most leadership team, the Global Management Committee, 27% women. 43% of our revenue producing roles are women. And all of this is because our intentional and focused efforts just do not stop at hiring the best women talent, but also, encouraging women to return to their career, professional career after taking a break for whatever reasons, right? But when you consider some of the more invisible communities, right, like persons with disabilities or the LGBTQI plus community, the goals may be a little different, but we have an exact similar commitment and rigor to delivering on that commitment. And therefore, it's important that your processes also align, right? Our recruiters and our hiring managers, they undergo regular sensitization and awareness training programs to ensure that they are managing any unconscious biases that come their way when they're interviewing or selecting candidates. And all of this is then enabled through technologies and tools and technology platforms are then by design made a lot more inclusive, more accessible for people with different physical or cognitive abilities.
Lakshmi, you invoked my competitive spirit, so I can't I can't not share this. Today, if you look at our group, we of course are investors in companies. So out of the 11 companies we've invested in, 9 have women CEOs. And even in fact, if you look at our 2 largest companies which we manage, the Lighthouse Communities is run by an outstanding woman from, I am Ahmedabad, 20 years in the social sector. And if you look at her leadership team, purely by merit, out of the 7 people in top management, 6 are women and doing outstanding work. Similarly, if you look at Global Talent Track, which is the largest company in our group, GTT is run by a woman, Mridula. And again, out of the 8 people in leadership, her chairperson is a woman, the 7 out of the 8 are women. And we're finding outstanding results.
I want to just ask you a little bit about the challenges to it, not just from your perspective. I think you all are doing some great work at Hindustan Unilever, but from a national perspective, what do you think are some of the challenges in the diversity and inclusion space that India has yet to kind of surmount?
I think it starts with educating our communities at the basic level to give children that place of equality. I think beyond that, I think it's solving for some very, very basic but very real issues where, girls are married off before they are 18. Girls, because of poor sanitation during their menstrual cycles, don't go, they are taken out from schools. We don't have enough women getting into STEM and senior education. We don't have enough representation of women while there are a lot of women in corporate India, while there are a lot of women in various walks of life, the arts, the government, and I think we've had some great numbers shared by my colleagues, but I think there is really more to be done. And till we do that, until we take this systemic and de-averaged approach, we will have some ground to cover. I think it starts with addressing the unconscious bias and stereotypes, which a lot of our brands, and you will see brands like, Dove, brands like Clinic Plus, which we are now using to stand and speak for real issues that, women in India face. But I think there is a lot of work to be done in education, in educating the men, educating the women, educating our country, and creating more role models before we really make this change last forever.
What are the challenges when it comes to supporting people with disabilities and creating an inclusive workforce for them, and especially from an India context, right?
I think the biggest challenge, to answer your question, is to get leaders to go beyond lip service. You ask any one of the top 500 leaders in this country, do you support people with disabilities? The answer will be absolutely yes. We should be inclusive, because it's a nice thing to say. But I remember when I was running NASCOM Foundation, we actually went around and talked to all the top companies in the IT industry and said, do you realize even your website is not inclusive? We should just kind of poke holes at them and saying, look, do you realize this office of yours is not inclusive? There's no ramp, etc., etc. And suddenly people start thinking about it. I think these are ways in which we have to make sure that people are welcoming people with disabilities and are also ensuring that they are positively advocating the cause. So then change will happen in the country. It's happening slowly, but it's happening.
Great point there, Dr. Ganeshan. And I alluded to this earlier. It's important to recognize, what makes it really sometimes challenging the needs of our persons with disabilities is they're largely invisible. A lot of these disabilities, right? And so our focus has been on creating a fully accessible, by design, barrier-free environment, whether it's our infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, or the technical infrastructure, and looking at the entire continuum, right from hiring to retaining and growing persons with very specific deliberate interventions. If I could share a few examples, at the time of hiring, what we've done is we've looked at our job descriptions to make sure they're bias-free. They can be opened up for all roles. You can open up all roles to all persons with any disabilities, right? We've dedicated some recruiters who work with our hiring managers to ensure that we're increasing the number of persons with disabilities that we are bringing in, because it sometimes requires a lot of sensitization of the hiring managers as well. Some of these persons do not necessarily have the requisite skills. So what we did was, instead of trying to find a ready fit talent from amongst persons with disability, we put in place an internship program, an inclusive internship program, and we made persons with disabilities go through workshops, skills, technical training over a 4 to 6 period, on-the-job training as well, and professional soft skill training, all of which at the end of it, they become a lot more employable both within Accenture, and we've also had some people finding opportunities outside Accenture. The other thing you've got to do is really create a lot of awareness, emphasis on awareness, celebrating all forms of disabilities. For example, last Friday, we celebrated World Autism Awareness Day. The objective is really twofold. You've got to make people with disabilities feel that they are recognized, they are valued, and increase awareness in general amongst the broader community within the organization about the disability itself, which kind of therefore encourages others with disability to also self-disclose and receive the right help and support. Like I mentioned, sometimes these are invisible, these disabilities, and you've got to go beyond attracting, hiring, and creating that environment. You've got to invest in them as they continue to grow in their careers as well.
Great point, Lakshmi, because if you really look at it, I learned how to deal with women as leaders from my very good friend Lalita Gupte, who was then the MD, joint MD of ICICI. The reason why ICICI were so successful to get women to bubble up to the workforce is that they were very, very supportive. Exactly the point Lakshmi was making. Not just hiring women, but helping them through critical phases of getting married, having children, etc., etc. And similarly, as you rightly said, people with disabilities. You have a disability, don't worry about it. Talk about it. Tell people that, look, I can't move my right arm. It doesn't make a difference. People will make sure that they support you in that. My golf caddy, who's my favorite golf caddy, he doesn't have a right arm. And he'll still come, and even if I have a friend with me who's playing golf, he'll carry both our bags. I said, look, Chang, don't do this. He said, no, sir. I don't want people to look at me with pity. I'm as good as any of you. Okay, and you need to reinforce the pride of those people. The minute you look at them with pity, you've lost it. But that's the point I was making. Everybody is equal. Let's also do a little bit, maybe obviously, maybe not so obviously, to make them feel included. And it doesn't matter whether it's women or community or disabilities, or it doesn't make a difference.
I wanted to really find out about successful cases of diversity and inclusion. So, Ganesh, if I could start with you, what are some of the successful models, and perhaps what more can be done, which involves corporates, India Incorporated, the social sector, as well as the government? I know you've done some pioneering work around this, so maybe you can start out by telling us.
Interestingly, the social sector is much easier to handle. As I mentioned, the 3 large entities I'm on the boards of. One is Lighthouse Communities, run by a woman, Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, Nana Batra in Singapore, the Social Venture Partners International, Sudha Nandagopal from Bangalore, who's a CEO. So I'm saying it's a very obvious thing that many, many women are running social enterprises. And good luck to them. They do great work. But it's more difficult. And that's why I'm saying when you look at examples, I think examples, I mean, I'm so proud of NASSCOM, our industry association. I mean, we 3 years back, we celebrated our first woman president, Debjani Ghosh. This year, we're going to celebrate our first woman chairman, Rekha Menon of Accenture. And it's amazing. I mean, we will actually have a situation where 39% of the NASSCOM leadership, elected, mind you, not selected, are going to be women, and the chairperson, and the president, and the senior vice president. So this is a classic example. Here's an industry, so you look at any other industry association, bar none, or maybe certain exception of All India Management Association. Most of the leadership are men. Most of the executive council are men. So here's an association which is changing. I'm saying there are examples in the social sector. I mean, our own example or Accenture's example and of course Unilever's example in the corporate sector, and associations like NASSCOM. I think if you're looking for an opportunity to replicate or to emulate somebody, there's enough role models. But if you want to say, oh, that company is still doing well and this is all women, all men on the board, give me a break. I mean, exceptions don't always prove the rule.
Lakshmi, is there anything you'd like to add on that in terms of what you all have been doing at Accenture?
Yeah, I mean, our focus, our commitment to supporting communities, especially marginalized communities, has been through both, it's kind of co-partnering with other NGOs to our Skills to Succeed corporate social responsibility programming. For example, with Cisco and Quest Alliance, we are currently equipping about 1.5 million youth across India with skills required for the digital economy via the government's Bharat Skills portal. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but a few years ago, we partnered with Enable India to create a rural social networking platform. It's called Hamari Vani. It works on the phone. It connects persons with disabilities to one missed call. All they have to do is just dial a number and leave it as a missed call to get called back. It connects people with opportunities. It empowers persons with disability to share their experiences in the employment space. You can push out welfare measures, government schemes, community level services through it. On average, it receives one call every minute, and that's impressive in terms of its utilization. And you realize what the need is. Clearly, you find people in the community. Last year, we launched what we call We Act. It's a program in collaboration with the Entrepreneurship Development Institute of India, and it's focused on empowering women entrepreneurs in rural India. And through this program's online platform, female entrepreneurs can access market information, they can get financial guidance, they can connect with peers, they can attend relevant training to transform their business. And our intention is to also expand it to include, access to grants to access capital needs or wider market access through e-commerce. But our biggest differentiator, I think, also is technology, because we are at a core of a technology business, and our labs has developed some pretty innovative tech for good programs, solutions. One is the solution we built along with BleeWatch, where we co-created a solution to help the hearing impaired listen to music, or Drishti, which is our innovation, co-innovation with the National Association for the Blind. It's an AI-powered application that narrates the physical environment to the visually challenged persons as well. So again, it's about creating an opportunity. If we really have teams encouraged to participate in innovation contests as well internally, to solve challenges faced by our clients. And one such solution was a team that created Sathi. Accenture actually won a Glomo Award in the best mobile innovation for enhancing children's lives, especially people with autism. Children with autism. It's a mobile app that enables autism therapy for children with autism. So it's about it's community and how do you leverage your organization's strengths as well to make an impact in the community and working through the ecosystem.
So, Lakshmi, I think you brought up some great examples there of use of technology, right? Drishti, Sati, etc. Now, how do you really blend all of this, technology, policies, and processes to really build inclusive workplaces and culture where everyone feels that they belong?
I mean, look at this platform today that we are on, right? I think it's a great leveler. no matter who's on it can contribute, correct? And internally at Accenture, we use, we've always used Microsoft Teams for all of our meetings. And what I realized with the use of my simple, small example, what I realized is, in the past where you have people sitting in a room and meeting, 2 people out of the 10 may be more vocal and contributing. The other 5, just because of sheer body language, whatever, may be quieter. But technology is such a huge leveler. Everybody contributes equally. When you're now in a virtual environment, everybody feels they can now contribute. So I think they all come together because at the core of it, it's about creating that whole inclusive environment and empowering environment. And we leverage technology quite significantly as an organization. I talked about Drishti. We also developed something called Dhwani, which is an innovative application using Microsoft cognitive services to help persons with hearing and speech disabilities to participate in conference calls, hear webcasts, and have conversations. We developed a few years back Women's Safety app. It is an app that is focused on helping women mark themselves safe when they arrive home after traveling during off-peak hours. So how do you leverage technology to solve the various problems? So technology cannot be a solution by itself is meaningless. You've got to use it to address a specific business problem. And that's how when you anchor it to your fundamental principles of equality, which is what I said, you start with bold goals, you create an empowering environment, but then solving some of those business problems, leveraging policies and technology truly brings it home for our people.
Lakshmi, we have a phrase for this which we have used in our new book on digital success. It's called "How do you use commonly available technology uncommonly well?" But as you rightly said, Lakshmi, we have to take all these things and put it together in formats where people really start using it. So to my mind, the point you made earlier, look at policies, look at processes, look at data which is available in abundance, and then integrate that with new technology. I mean, it's a very, very potent combination, and as absolutely can help diversity and inclusion to flourish in any context.
But what role does proactive skilling and leadership development really play in ensuring a diverse and inclusive workforce and a diverse and inclusive organization?
Yeah, we know that leadership and the quality of line managers is one of the single most important, determinants of an individual's performance, or can become a deterrent or a reason for people to leave an organization. And therefore, I think it's really important that we train leaders to be inclusive and demonstrate inclusion in their everyday behaviors. For example, in the last year, it's been around how do you lead virtually? And leaders didn't know how to do that. So working with them on simple things like that. And at HUL, we partner with various expertise organizations, whether it's a selection for gender balance slates, whether it's leading virtually, leading in a flexi virtual environment, where people get not just broad-based training, but really a sense of their own limiting beliefs and their mindset gaps. For example, over the last 6 months, the management committee of HUL, including myself, have been through a program on a leadership intervention on inclusion, where we actually spend 10 or 12 hours on understanding why it's important for us and what are some of our limiting beliefs which come in the way of expanding our teams and being totally inclusive. And one of the things it included is an inventory which gives you a very, very sharp set of feedback, gives you very sharp feedback on what are your limiting beliefs. Where do you, for example, do you create an environment of psychological safety? Do you have awareness of what it means to be a member of an underrepresented group? And I think, and for example, this also included diversity dialogues with people who are underrepresented or so-called minorities in the organization. And I think the whole thing is to create empathy, to create an openness, and in that way, like I said, make a difference to everyday behaviors of leaders.
So we've had a great discussion today, and I'd really like to thank our esteemed panelists today, Lakshmi from Accenture India, Anuradha Razdan from Hindustan Unilever, and of course, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, who wears so many hats. I think we've looked at so many different issues around diversity and inclusion. We've looked at how it really makes business sense, really, how it's not just something that is good to have, but how it is really important to have, because it has an impact even on revenues, even on things like GDP, etc. And we've looked at the challenges and the way forward for other companies in terms of processes, people, in terms of you leveraging technology to do so, and so much more. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure, Ivor. Thank you so much for this discussion.